Hi guys, what's going on? What's happening? Hope everything's going well for you. Just a reminder, there's no class Thursday um, at all. It's a rejuvenation day, so get your rejuvenation on. Um, but I I will be posting a video, Chris Rock teacher talk video, so that'll be there um, for the five of you that care about those. Um, but today we're going to talk about Janeane Garofalo. And I'm just going to say this in full disclosure. I was, and I still am, just in love with Janeane Garofalo. Yeah, always have been since I first saw her do comedy and just her whole thing is just, I like it. I like it a lot. And um, it would make sense because, like I said in class, some of the stuff's from class, but she was the 90s comedy it girl for sure. Um, and like, sense of humor and is just, it's like, I know people put that on their list of like what attracts them to people, but it's usually for show. When people put it up there, it's usually so they don't feel like a complete superficial piece of shit. I mean, I would put sense of humor, if not at number one, at least at number 1A. Um, and my wife is emblematic of that as well. So anyway, it would make sense that I was in love with Jeannie Ruffalo because she was this 90s it girl. She was she was Gen X through and through. So she had kind of this different, I don't want to say different aesthetic. She has a Margaret Cho thing kind of going on. They were contemporaries for sure. Um, but a lot of you noted in your comments like this just sounds different. It's a different voice. It's a different approach. It's more relatable. It's self-deprecating. It's all of these things were kind of new to comedy in the 90s, and she embraced all those things, like obviously. um, she was doing stand-up. She was a cast member on SNL. She was basically Ben Stiller's muse for a long time. Like they worked together. They might have been dating too as part of it. um, but he had a brilliant sketch show on Fox when Fox was a fledgling network. And it was her and Stiller and Andy Dick and Bob Odenkirk, who is Saul from Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. Um, those were the four. They did this sketch show. It was brilliant. Like she became this sort of voice of a generation, like pretty legit voice of a generation. Like I know that's a cliche, but um, she was so, and that generation was mine. So it's, it kind of makes sense, like that I would feel connected to her, um, more so than a lot of the other comedians that we've been talking about. And what a number of you noted in your comments was, and we talked about this in class, like it's the first time. I'm trying to think. It's the first time this semester that there is this overt self-deprecation occurring. right? Like, I mean, Eddie Murphy isn't self-deprecating. Carlin's not self-deprecating. Hicks isn't self-deprecating, right? Am I right? Those guys are like, Dice, Dice and Kinnison aren't self-deprecating. Cosby maybe a little, but still, he kind of seems like he thinks he's better than you, right? So I want to say it. I want to say it. And I don't have the data to back it up, but it's she sort of ushered in this self-deprecating thing, or at least helped popularize it, or it became part of that movement, that Gen X sort of sentiment or zeitgeist, I guess you could say. And that's not. It's almost neither here nor there. It's what leads to self-deprecation that is important. And what leads to that is humility. And this is something that we focused on in class on Tuesday. There's a humility that is inherent to comedy, especially stand-up, that we're generally lacking in the culture as a whole now. That humility works in many different ways. I think the humility of Carlin, or comedians like Carlin, isn't I'm no better than you. It's I don't know. I don't have all the answers, right? And me doing stand up is my process of seeking the truth, right? That's one type of humility, and it's different than Garofalo's. Garofalo's is literally I'm no better than you, and I don't, I'm not, I don't have all the answers either. Like I'm just living my truth, as it were. And I said I talked about humility a lot and being humble. Like, if Trump is or was or is, I mean, he is the pure embodiment of the lack of humility that we have in our culture. Now it's seen as a weakness. If you're humble, if you admit that you're wrong, if you admit that you have flaws, if you apologize for things, if you're seen as weak. And it couldn't be further from the truth. That's what weak-minded people want you to feel about being humble. But it takes way more strength to admit fault than it does to lie and act like you know everything, if that makes any sense, or you can't do no wrong. And again, this all ties in to comedy. I think humility is inherent to comedy, and in a way that you don't see in the culture anymore. There's certainly a premium on it, and now when you see it, it looks, or it's condemned in many cases. We think about Trump at the first primaries, the primaries of his run for president. He literally just stood there and insulted, you're fat, you're ugly, your wife's ugly, you're stupid, you lack energy. I don't know why that's a criticism. Like, that was it. It was, I'm better than you. I'm perfect. And Trump's whole thing is lack of humility. So I think that's something that's really important about her comedy. And I can't remember who it was that mentioned, um, was it Jackie? I can't remember who it was who said that. Something about how um, I'm sorry that I didn't write this one down, but it was a good comment. It was kind of that she thought you. The comment was, I thought this was a more recent thing, like a millennial comedy was defined by that self-deprecating thing. But you kind of realized that 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 she sort of was ushering it in and dealing with it. Just some stuff on humility and comedy that I have opined before. Comedy is built on humility, honesty, and an underdog mentality, which is certainly embodied by Garofalo. All ideas far removed from, but essential to, the popular conception of being American. Humility has become such a foreign sentiment to us. That we don't even sort of acknowledge it or recognize it when it's hitting us in the face. The arrogance of certitude needs to be replaced by the humility of inquiry. That's the one I was looking for. And, you know, comedy has enough humility to suggest that maybe this whole thing was a failure and we need a different system, right? Like that's kind of back to that Hicks Carlin humility, right? If you want to define it that way. So in the battle for our culture and its future, arrogance is kicking the shit out of humility. Like, I mean, right now, yeah, it is. But comedians, I think, are a call to humility for us to be more humble. And Garofalo certainly chief among them. She's an asexual atheist, and a lot of you commented on this like that. That's the most, and for me too, the most interesting part about her, this show, is her description of being asexual, which is, it's funny, but it's like, oh my god, yeah. And she's like, it's amazing the things you can get done when you take sex off the table, and especially for women who, you know, so much of their identity is tied to that, to sex and sexuality, in terms of like having to look a certain way and do your hair and your makeup and your clothes and like all of that. You take it off the table and you're like, it's like using all of your brain like that. You know, you've always heard that, oh, we only use X% of our brains. Like taking sex off the table allows us to operate at full capacity, basically. I'm like, never thought of it that way. A couple of you mentioned, like, I've never heard of an asexual, right, in terms of sexual orientation and things like that. And she just explains it in a funny and interesting kind of way that makes this, we brought this up in class. I think Kaylee mentioned it in class, like, I never thought of it that way. Like, yes, you should, we as people should say that at least once a day. I never thought of it that way, because inherent in that statement of, oh my god, I never thought of that, I never thought of it that way, is that humility that I'm talking about, right? I didn't know that. I didn't think about it that way. Maybe if I do, maybe there's this whole other world out there that I don't know about that is awesome. And she ties that with her atheism, right? I'm an asexual atheist, which is kind of funny. It's like, then what do you believe in, right? What happens when you take sex and religion off the table, right? not just sex off the table, but sex and religion. These two things that are have have a way of completely manipulating us into, being things that we're not, or to be a certain way. You take those two things off the table. I love her whole joke about her prayer lock-ins and stuff like that, and her reaction to being basically sexually assaulted. She turned to religion. She's like, religion equals say no to life, right? But when you remove that and sex from the table, you can truly be your best self. Um, at least that's kind of what she's putting out there. And I think I love that whole bit that she does, and she keeps going back to it. But the whole religion was like a say no to life campaign. Um, she talks about this too. Like a bunch of you were like, oh, she doesn't care what people think of her, no fucks given, like that whole thing. And she says, like, if you can say I don't give a shit and mean it, like that is liberating. Like if you can say that, because a lot of people say I don't give a shit, but they really do. Um, so adding that caveat of if you can say I don't give a shit and mean it, like that's a whole different animal. And you know, it's it's a step towards self realization, self actualization that a lot of us can never take, or are incapable of taking. Um, so she talks about that. I think that's interesting that that's how she phrases it. A bunch of you talked about how this is like hateless comedy. There's really no victims in this kind of comedy. She's not angry, um, and I tied it back to like she does turn, like she takes that the vitriol of the Diskoya Kinnison, like this women thing. She does do jokes about men. She kind of turns that on its ear. It's not nearly as vicious, and she doesn't feel as threatened, but it's like, yeah, I'm gonna do some jokes about men and their sort of shortcomings, as it were. Um, so I like about the cutting the toenails and just things like that. Um, there's more of that too, more of this sentiment like we've been talking about all semester. Like there's no one way to be a thing. Um, in this case, a woman. Like she's unique, right? There's no one way to be a woman, and you know the whole bit with the Spanx. Like you could look at that two different ways: as her owning her body, or as her trying to conform and make it look a certain way, and that's bad, right? You could interpret it both ways, but why does one have to be bad and one is good? Like there's no right or wrong way to be a woman or whatever. And feminism isn't um, it's not, or it doesn't have to be, and this is what a lot of people say about it. um, it doesn't have to be about rejecting aspects of life that are typically assigned to women. Does that make sense? Like to be a good feminist, you don't have to look like a troll and completely disregard, traditional um, traditional concepts of beauty and body image. You don't have to. Like that's not, we love to reduce things to their lowest common denominator, right? So like, it's easy to say, oh, well, you're pretty, so you don't count, or you can't. Yeah, you don't have an opinion. You don't have a struggle. Um, it's easy to say that and reduce it down to those kinds of things. Whereas like it's, and the flip side is like, for feminism at least, is like, well, you can, you are a feminist if you fuck a lot of guys now. Like that's, you know, that's the battleground. That's cool. And yeah, so it's there's more than one. There's no one way to be a thing. Is the takeaway. Again, like, just because she wears Spanx, which can be interpreted as, oh, you're conforming to society's beauty standards and body standards. Like, uh, yeah, that's being a feminist, and being uh, an activist doesn't mean you have to give up those things that are traditionally feminine. Our lives are our own. Did she say that? I wrote that down. Did she say that? I guess that was one of my takeaways. Um, yeah. So, I don't know what that means. It's not just the good things that keep you up. She said that at one point. Wait. It's not the good things that keep you up at night. That's what. Um, so comment wise, um, I was really happy that pretty much all of you were like, wow, I really liked her. Because I'm always skeptical going in. I want you guys to like her. But I'm worried because, you know, um, I guess I'm not worried about it, but I think about it a lot, and I'm like, I hope they like her. So when you do, that makes me feel good. Um, so I marked Sophia, mentioned the self-deprecation and the humility, and basically, like, most of you did. Most of you tapped into that. Um, AG did. Um, I'm not going to list everybody because more, sorry, more of you did than didn't mention the self-deprecating thing and how refreshing it was. I think Caitlin even went so far as to say um, her humility made her respect her more, made you respect her more as a person and a comedian, as both. I'm like, yes, thank you. Um, Another benefit of not being a complete arrogant asshole is you generally earn the respect of people. I think, I hope, maybe you don't anymore. Um, and then Logan, Logan gave us the chillax versus yelling spectrum, with Garofalo chillaxing at this end and Bill Hicks yelling at us at this end. Although I would have put Kinnison yelling if you really want to oppose the two polls. I just thought the chillax yelling scale was a good rubric under which to evaluate comedians. Um, she's definitely chillaxing on the chillax scale. Matt used the term hate-free dialogue, which I liked. Now she does hate Republicans and Tea Party. She has a, I don't know if you saw it, like, she has a tattoo that says liberal right on her shoulder. And there's a segment at the end of the DVD. I don't know if it's on what I shared with you guys, but where she's interviewed by this, she's sort of ambushed by this, like, right wing or Republican, conservative Republican senator, congressman, or something. It's a really interesting interaction. So she does hate, but like I agree, like especially coming off on the heels of Dice and the really hateful comedians. The hate-free resonated with me. Hate-free dialogue. I appreciated that. Um, Ariel brought up this idea that stand-up might is the end for her. We talked about this. Like, I have more respect for comedians who just want to be comedians, and as a result, take the job seriously enough to make their content and their material about something. And I think she has had a pretty solid television and movie career. But like I feel like stand up, and Ariel even mentioned Wet Hot American Summer, which is just thank you for reminding me that that exists. Um, but Ariel mentioned like it seems like stand up is the end for her, the thing that she's most passionate about, and like really she wants to be known as a comedian. I think, um, and she seems to have stepped back from the business more, and she's doing more stand up, which like I said, I respect that. Uh, Drew Drew mentioned the humanity. I wrote this. This was my reading of your comment. Um, Janeane Garofalo and Ellen both designed their acts around making it easier to see the humanity behind someone who may be different from their audience. Like, so the humanity of difference, right? Showing the humanity of difference, which is a concept that I like, and I think they do both do that um, in very different ways, but nonetheless, being like, this is me. We like a bunch of you mentioned she does a lot of universal comedy, like that everyone can relate to. So, this is a different, we all do this shit. So why are we at each other's throats all the time? Um, the humanity of difference is what we will call that, Drew. So continue. Um, Caitlin talked about the asexuality and how I think you were the one who was like, I never heard of that before. Um, and the joke, I mean, it's a great joke. The Food Network versus porn thing. Porn's like watching the Food Network. I can watch it for 20 hours, but I don't want to cook anything at the end, right? Like, yeah, I think that's a great joke and a great point about just an interesting, thing about her and about people, like this whole asexuality thing. Um, and as I mentioned before, her humility made you respect her more, and I think we need more of that sentiment moving forward. Like we should identify and respect humility in people more than we do. Um, Tom and Logan. Tom echoed Logan, I guess, in the comment about you know um, owning what others put down, what might put down. If that makes any sense. The whole Jewish lesbian. She's like, oh, would that I were a Jewish lesbian. That would be fucking fantastic, right? So like taking the negative and turning it into a positive um, is something that she does frequently, especially in those those moments when, you know, her fame bumps up against the reality of of being her, if that makes any sense. Like the Jewish, calling her a Jewish comedian. She's like, well, thank you. I'm flattered by those two. Typically pejorative, in this scenario, pejorative um, classifications for her. Um, and Logan kind of talked about which we talked about with Ellen, sort of speaking, Drew's comment of the humanity of difference. Like, I'm just like you. Like, I just look this way and I do this and I'm a comedian, but at the end of the day, we're all pretty close to the same, um, fundamentally. And then Jackie, finish off with Jackie's comment. I liked this idea that, well, Jackie said, it's like she's there for her audience as much as they are there for her. And that is not an easy feat to pull off, to make you feel that. Um, Someone else mentioned she's talking with her audience, not at or to her audience. And I think that enhances her humility and all those kinds of things that draw people to her material. So glad you liked Janeane. I'm going to give you guys a bonus word right here to use in your response to this post. The extra credit word is scramble, like the eggs. Use the word scramble in your comment to this post and get the extra credit time points values. Yay.